Negri in Davos. Negri is right apropos of forums such as Davos. They are the enlightened capitalists' general intellect, the space for formulating their general interest, the space to listen to other voices, to confront ecology, poverty, and so on, to expound on problems of spirituality and the rest, with a view to combining the struggle against pollution and poverty, or whatever it may be, with capitalism. This really is communist capitalism. Capitalism which tries to include the communist topic of the endangered commons. The very fact of the importance of Davos Forum, much more than the old Trilateral Commission, its predecessor, the need for a forum like Davos, is proof of the crisis of capitalism, of the threat of the commons. Davos is the collective brain of the empire, its think tank. Negri even proposed to Davos a strategic pact against the American project, although in the long term, the multitude and Davos are enemies. In the short term, they share the interest of defeating the US coup d'etat against the global empire. A strange logic indeed. Instead of exploiting the inconsistency of the enemy, one helps him establish the most effective form. To put it in other words, what if the very idea of a pure empire, which leaves behind the nation-state form, and in which the capitalist general intellect runs things directly, is an impossible abstraction? What if the role of nation-states is irreducible and crucial, and with it the temptation of some nation-states to carry out coup d'etat against the empire, so that the exception, the excessive role of a nation-state in the empire, is in fact the rule? Negri here is not Leninist enough. To put it in Deleuzean terms already evoked, Lenin's moment is the dark precursor, the vanishing mediator, the displaced object never in its own place, between the two series, the initial orthodox Marxian series of revolution in the most developed countries, and the new orthodox series of Stalinist socialism in one country, and then the Maoist identification of the third world nations with the new world proletariat. The shift from Lenin to Stalinism here is clear and easy to determine. Lenin perceived the situation as desperate, unexpected, but as such, one which had to be creatively exploited for new political choices. With the notion of socialism in one country, Stalin renormalized the situation into a new narrative of linear development in stages. That is to say, while Lenin was fully aware that an anomaly had happened, revolution in a country which does not have the presuppositions for developing a socialist society, he rejected the vulgar evolutionist conclusion that revolution had taken place prematurely, so that one should take a step back in order to develop a modern democratic capitalist society, which would then slowly create the conditions for socialist revolution, claiming that, to refer back to the crucial passage we quoted earlier, this very complete hopelessness of the situation offers the opportunity to create the fundamental requisites of civilization in a different way from that of the West European countries. What Lenin is proposing here is effectively an implicit theory of alternate history, under the premature domination of the force of the future. The same necessary historical process of modern civilization can be rerun in a different way. Perhaps this attitude is today more relevant than ever. The situation is completely hopeless, with no clear realistic revolutionary perspective. But does this not give us a kind of strange freedom, a freedom to experiment? One has only to throw away the deterministic model of objective necessities and obligatory stages of development. One has thus to sustain a minimum of anti-determinism. Nothing is ever written off in an objective situation which precludes any act, which condemns us fully to biopolitical vegetation. There is always a space to be created for an act, precisely because, to paraphrase Rosa Luxemburg's critique of reformism, it is not enough to wait patiently for the right moment of the revolution. If one merely waits for it, it will never come, for one has to start with premature attempts which, therein resides the pedagogy of the revolution, in their very failure to achieve their professed goal, create the subjective conditions for the right moment. Recall Mao's slogan, "From defeat to the final victory," which echoes in Beckett's already quoted motto, "Try again, fail better." In this precise sense, Lenin was a Beckettian avant la lettre. What he basically proposed that the Bolsheviks should do in the desperate situation at the end of the Civil War was not to directly construct socialism, but to fail better than a normal bourgeois state. It holds also for the revolutionary process that, to paraphrase Derrida's well-known dictum once again, the condition of impossibility is the condition of possibility. The condition of impossibility, Russian backwardness and isolation which made socialism impossible, is part of the same exceptional situation which made the first socialist revolution possible. In other words, instead of bemoaning the historical anomaly of a revolution in an exceptional and immature situation, with the expectation that the revolution would start in the most developed capitalist countries, one should bear in mind that revolution never arrives on time, when the objective social process generates the mature conditions for it. The point of Lenin's famous notion of the weakest link in the chain is, again, that one should use the anomaly as a lever to exacerbate the antagonisms so that they render possible a revolutionary explosion. Negri is also right to point out that in this new global order, wars in the old sense of the term are less and less feasible. What we refer to as wars are police interventions of a global state into an area which is experienced as a threat to the global order. War and politics are combined in military policing, in imposing order in a chaotic area. It is, paradoxically, Bush's politics which has continued the tradition of old wars, being an attempt by a nation-state to carry out a coup d'etat against the empire, to subordinate the empire. With regard to the empire, it is the US which is the banana republic. Here, however, Negri becomes ambiguous. On the one hand, he is clear that the capitalist general intellect is, in the long term, the true enemy. On the other hand, apropos Lula, he supports the policies which aim at breaking US hegemony and at establishing a pluricentric global capitalism. The US, Europe, with maybe Russia, China, and the Far East, Latin America, and so on. Contrary to misleading appearances, the American century is over, and we are already entering the period of the formation of multiple centers of global capitalism. Is the fact that, on his visit to the US in April 2006, the Chinese president was first the guest of Bill Gates, not a sign of these new times? So perhaps, in this new era, each of the new centers will stand for capitalism with a specific twist. The US for neoliberal capitalism, Europe, with maybe Russia, for what remains of the welfare state, China for Eastern values and authoritarian capitalism, Latin America for populist capitalism. After the failure of the US attempt to impose itself as the sole superpower, the universal policeman, there is now the need to establish the rules of interaction between these local centers in case of conflicting interests. Although Emmanuel Todd's vision of the contemporary global order is clearly one-sided, it is difficult to deny its moment of truth, that the US is an empire in decline.
Its growing negative balance of trade demonstrates that the US is the unproductive predator. It has to suck up an influx of $1 billion a day from other nations to meet its consumption needs, and is, as such, the universal Keynesian consumer that keeps the world economy running. So much for the anti-Keynesian economic ideology that seems to predominate today. This influx, which is effectively like the tithe paid to Rome in antiquity, relies on a complex economic mechanism. The US is trusted as the safe and stable center, so that all others, from the oil-producing Arab countries to Western Europe and Japan, and now even China, invest their surplus profits in the US. Since this trust is primarily ideological and military, not economic, the problem for the US is how to justify its imperial role. It needs a permanent state of war, so it had to invent the war on terror, offering itself as the universal protector of all other normal, non-rogue states. The entire globe thus tends to function as a universal Sparta with three classes, now emerging as the first, second, and third worlds. 1. The US as the military, political, ideological power. 2. Europe and parts of Asia and Latin America as the industrial manufacturing region. Crucial here are Germany and Japan, the world's leading exporters, plus rising China. 3. The undeveloped rest, today's helots. In other words, global capitalism has brought about a new general trend towards oligarchy, masked as the celebration of the diversity of cultures. Equality and universalism are rapidly disappearing as actual political principles. However, even before it has fully established itself, this neo-Spartan world system is breaking down. In contrast to 1945, the world does not need the US. It is the US which needs the world. Since the world of today is composed of too many regional centers which cannot be controlled, the only thing the US can do to assert itself as the global military power is to engage in theatrical wars or crises with weak adversaries, Iraq, Cuba, Korea, Iran, not with true alternative centers of power, China, Russia. The violent outbursts of the recent Bush administration are thus not exercises in power, but rather exercises in panic, irrational passage à l'acte. Perhaps this focus on thwarting the US coup d'etat against empire accounts for Negri's strange elevation of Lula at the expense of Chavez. There doesn't exist in Latin America an alternative to the political project promised by Lula and the Brazilian PT. Now, above all recently, the Bolivarian Venezuela of Chavez was presented as an alternative to the project of Lula. But it is obvious that this alternative is purely ideological, very abstract. In Venezuela in particular, the relationship between political power and the capacity of developing economic productive alternatives still seems to be in deficit. So what are these achievements of Lula's? Negri mentions only two, that Lula governs in a direct dialogue with the movements, and that he is practicing new measures, paying off the IMF debt, and so on, to ensure the government's autonomy from international capital. Negri himself admits that this goal of establishing a new international equilibrium has priority over the struggle against social inequalities. So what will happen when the US coup d'etat is defeated and the general intellect will run the empire? Here enters another weird feature, Negri's unexpected Eurocentrism. In a subsequent period, when global multilateralism is stabilized and aristocratic global representations are determined on a continental basis, Europe will become the only democratic mediator within this new global constitution. We need Europe because of this. Europe is the only occasion for a pluralist and democratic push of real and dynamic transformation at the global level. The problem here is not Eurocentrism as such, but rather the lack of conceptual justification. Why exactly is only Europe capable of triggering a pluralist and democratic push of real and dynamic transformation at the global level?